Are the military strategies of the past century truly equipped to handle the complex conflicts of today? What happens when a global superpower's ultimate battle plan is no longer the guarantee of victory it once was? So, here is a question that keeps coming up in military circles and think tanks and government buildings and honestly in living rooms around the world right now. Can the United States actually win a modern war using the strategy it has leaned on for the last 30 years? That strategy has a name. It is called shock and awe. And if you have watched any coverage of American military operations over the past few decades, you have heard that phrase. But do you actually know what it means? Do you know where it came from? And more importantly, do you know why serious people are starting to question whether it still works? Let us start from the beginning, because this story goes back further than most people realize. After World War II, the world was split between two massive superpowers. The United States on one side, the Soviet Union on the other. Both countries had nuclear weapons. Both countries had enormous armies. Both countries had the ability to destroy each other completely. And that created one of the strangest situations in human history. You had two of the most powerful nations ever to exist on this planet, and they could not fight each other directly, because if they did, both sides would be wiped out. Nuclear missiles would fly, cities would be destroyed, millions of people would die within hours. And so you had this bizarre balance where everyone was armed to the teeth, but nobody could actually pull the trigger. That situation was called mutually assured destruction, which is a phrase that sounds almost darkly comedic when you say it out loud. Mutually assured destruction, meaning if you shoot, I shoot, and we both die. That was the logic that kept the Cold War cold, and it forced the American military to think differently. Instead of preparing for a direct confrontation with the Soviets, the United States started focusing on something else entirely. They started focusing on projecting power, on demonstrating strength, on creating the image that American military force was so overwhelming, so technologically superior that any enemy would be foolish to challenge it. And out of that thinking came the doctrine of shock and awe. The basic idea is almost elegant in its simplicity. You do not grind down an enemy slowly. You do not fight a long war of attrition. Instead, you hit them so hard and so fast in the first hours of a conflict that the entire system collapses. You destroy the command centers, you take out the communication networks, you eliminate the leadership. And once the head is gone, the body does not know what to do. The soldiers panic. The army loses coordination, the government falls apart, and the war ends almost before the average person even realizes it started. And for a while, this approach seemed to work beautifully. Think about the Gulf War in 1991. Think about the invasion of Iraq in 2003. In both cases, American forces launched massive air campaigns. Cruise missiles flew through the night sky and hit government buildings with extraordinary precision. Radar installations were destroyed. Communication systems went dark. And within days, the opposing government had effectively collapsed. People watched it happen on television on this channel and others, concluding that this was the future of warfare. They believed that modern conflicts could be resolved quickly, decisively, and with relatively limited casualties, at least on the American side, if you simply hit the enemy with enough technological force fast enough. Before we move into how this is changing, I want to hear from you. Do you think the rapid success of those past campaigns gave military planners a false sense of security? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But here is where things start to get complicated. And this is the part of the conversation that military planners are genuinely wrestling with right now. The world has changed. The enemies that America and other major powers face today are not organized the same way that Iraq was organized in 1991 or 2003. And because of that, the assumptions built into shock and awe may no longer hold up. Here's what I mean. Shock and awe works on a specific assumption. It assumes that military and political power is centralized. It assumes there is a capital city, a central command, a military headquarters, a leadership structure that can be identified, targeted, and destroyed. Destroy the center, and the whole system falls. That logic makes sense if your enemy is built like a traditional nation-state with a pyramid structure of command. But what happens when your enemy is not built that way? What happens when military units operate independently with their own objectives and their own supply networks and their own communication systems? What happens when, even if you kill the top leadership, the units on the ground already know what they are supposed to do and just keep doing it? Suddenly, destroying the capital city does not end the war. It just changes the battlefield. The conflict becomes more chaotic, more distributed, and in many ways harder to control. This is the concept of decentralized command, and it has become a defining feature of how many modern military organizations operate. They are built specifically to survive the kind of attack that shock and awe is designed to deliver. You can cut off the head, and the body keeps moving. Now add to this something called asymmetrical warfare, and the picture gets even more complex. Asymmetrical warfare is when two sides in a conflict are not fighting the same kind of war. One side might have aircraft carriers, stealth bombers, satellite networks, and precision-guided munitions that cost millions of dollars each. The other side might have none of those things. But instead of trying to match that firepower directly, the weaker side fights completely differently. Let me give you a very concrete example, because this is not theoretical anymore. This is happening right now. Imagine one side of a conflict is using small drones. Simple, relatively cheap, mass-produced drones. Some of them cost around $40,000 or $50,000 each. These drones can fly hundreds of miles. They can carry explosive payloads. They can strike power plants, oil refineries, military bases, port infrastructure. They are easy to build in large numbers. They are easy to transport and hide. They can be launched from pickup trucks or from the backs of buildings. Now, think about how the technologically superior side defends against this. They have advanced missile defense systems, sophisticated radar networks that track incoming objects and launch interceptor missiles to destroy them before they hit their targets. These systems are genuinely a remarkable piece of technology. But here's the problem. Each interceptor missile might cost $1 million. Some of them cost significantly more than that. And sometimes one missile is not enough to take down a drone. You might need to fire 2 or 3 to guarantee a kill. So do the math. A $50,000 drone gets shot down by $2 million worth of interceptor missiles. And if the other side launches 100 drones in a single night, you will be burning through $200 million of defense budget in a few hours to stop weapons that cost $5 million to produce. It is a terrifying mathematical reality. If you were a defense strategist, how would you solve this $2 million missile versus $50,000 drone problem? Drop your theories in the comments, because the Pentagon is trying to figure this out right now. That is the economic logic of asymmetrical warfare. The weaker side forces the stronger side to spend itself into exhaustion. And the stronger side, with all its technological brilliance, can find itself trapped in a situation where winning each individual battle becomes financially unsustainable. And this problem is only going to get worse as technology continues to evolve. Because in the past, building serious military hardware required massive industrial capacity. You needed huge factories, enormous supply chains, highly specialized labor. Only the biggest and wealthiest nations could produce advanced weapons. But that is changing. Drones can be assembled in relatively modest facilities. Electronic components are commercially available on the global market. Software can be written by small teams of engineers working in ordinary office buildings. The industrial barrier to entry for certain kinds of military capability is dropping. And what this means is that the monopoly on sophisticated firepower that major powers like the United States have relied on is eroding. Not disappearing, but eroding. And when that advantage shrinks even slightly, the assumptions built into doctrines like shock and awe start to look more fragile. There is another layer to this that often gets underestimated, and that is the role of ideology and belief. Some armies fight because they are paid to. Some soldiers serve because it is a profession. But in certain conflicts, people fight because they believe they are defending something that matters more than their own survival. Their religion, their homeland, their identity, their community. And when a conflict has that kind of meaning for the people fighting it, the math of traditional military strategy starts to break down. Destroying a leadership structure does not end a war. When every individual fighter sees themselves as a leader in their own right, bombing infrastructure does not produce surrender. When the people on the ground interpret suffering as confirmation that they are on the right side of a righteous struggle. In these situations, the strategy of shock and awe can actually backfire. It can strengthen resolve, it can create martyrs, it can deepen the conflict rather than ending it. This brings up a fascinating debate. Can advanced technology ever truly defeat a deeply rooted ideology? I would love to read your perspective on this, so please share your opinion down below. Now, pull all of this together and you start to understand why people are genuinely worried about what a major conflict would look like today. Not a conflict against a small, disorganized opponent, but a serious confrontation between powers that have thought carefully about how to counter American military doctrine. What would happen if shock and awe was deployed and it simply did not produce the expected collapse? What comes next? Because the doctrine was never really designed with a plan B in mind. It was built on the assumption that overwhelming force in the opening hours would be decisive. If that assumption proves wrong, a war that was supposed to end in days could drag on for years, and the economic consequences of that kind of prolonged conflict would not stay contained to the battlefield. We live in a deeply interconnected global economy. Energy markets, financial markets, supply chains, all of it is woven together in ways that make large-scale disruption extremely dangerous. Oil prices spike, trade routes get blocked, financial markets go into freefall. A regional military conflict becomes a global economic crisis almost overnight. This is why military doctrine matters for people who have no interest in military affairs. Because doctrine shapes how leaders think about whether and when to use force. It shapes the assumptions they bring to crisis situations. And if those assumptions are based on a model of warfare that no longer reflects reality, leaders may make decisions that produce outcomes nobody intended and nobody wanted. The doctrines that dominate military thinking today were largely developed in a world that no longer exists. They were products of the Cold War era, shaped by Cold War assumptions, refined through conflicts that may not be representative of what comes next. The question of whether they have adapted fast enough to the new realities of drones, decentralized command, asymmetrical tactics, and ideologically motivated fighters is one that no military establishment in the world can answer with complete confidence. So when you hear people talking about the possibility of a major conflict in the Middle East or in Asia, understand that underneath all the news coverage and political commentary, there is a deeper and more unsettling question being asked. Not just whether a war might happen, but whether the strategies that powerful nations believe will win that war are actually going to work when tested against real opponents in the real world. Because if shock and awe is a doctrine of the past dressed up as a strategy for the future, then the next great conflict could reveal that in the most costly way imaginable. Beyond the physical battlefield, there's an entirely invisible front that makes traditional military doctrines look even more antiquated. We have discussed drones, decentralized command, and the erosion of conventional firepower. But what happens when the attack does not come from the sky at all? Welcome to the era of cyber warfare and digital sabotage. In the past, crippling a nation's vital infrastructure meant sending waves of heavy bombers to systematically destroy power plants, bridges, and rail lines. Today, a handful of highly trained operatives sitting at computer terminals thousands of miles away can achieve the exact same level of societal paralysis without firing a single physical bullet. They can inject malicious code into the software that controls a major city's water purification supply. They can shut down the electrical grid in the dead of winter, plunging millions of people into darkness and freezing temperatures. They can freeze the national banking system, wiping out data and making it impossible for citizens to buy basic food or fuel. This is the ultimate modernized form of asymmetrical warfare. A sophisticated cyber attack that costs a few $100,000 to develop can cause hundreds of billions of dollars in economic damage. And unlike a ballistic missile strike, a cyber attack offers the attacker a thick veil of plausible deniability. You cannot always prove exactly who launched the code or which government sponsored the hackers, which makes traditional retaliation politically complicated and strategically dangerous. If the doctrine of shock and awe was fundamentally about breaking the enemy's physical capacity to resist, modern cyber warfare is about paralyzing the society from the inside out before the military even has a chance to fully deploy. Then, we have to look up, way up, far beyond the Earth's atmosphere. Space is the invisible, pulsing nervous system of the modern American military apparatus. Almost every single piece of advanced technology that the United States relies on, from precision-guided munitions and high-altitude surveillance drones to the most basic communication links between ground infantry units, depends entirely on a delicate network of satellites orbiting the planet. But what happens if a peer adversary decides to deliberately blind that nervous system? Space is no longer a peaceful scientific sanctuary. It is a highly contested military domain. Major global powers have already developed, tested, and deployed advanced anti-satellite weapons. Some of these are kinetic physical missiles designed to smash directly into orbit at blistering speeds. Others are highly sophisticated directed energy weapons, lasers, or jamming technologies that can scramble signals or permanently blind sensitive optical sensors without creating debris. If a major conflict breaks out and those critical satellites are neutralized or severely degraded in the opening hours, the most technologically advanced military force in human history suddenly finds itself deaf, blind, and totally disoriented. A billion-dollar stealth fighter jet becomes significantly less lethal and far more vulnerable if it cannot connect to the global positioning system. Ground commanders cannot coordinate complex, multi-domain strikes if their secure, encrypted communications are suddenly reduced to nothing but static. The immediate loss of space dominance would instantly level the playing field, dragging a 21st century force violently back into a 20th century reality where basic line-of-sight communication, unguided artillery, and traditional map reading once again dictate who survives the battlefield. Compounding these severe technological vulnerabilities is the rapid, almost unchecked integration of artificial intelligence into military command and decision-making structures. We are rapidly entering a terrifying phase where the sheer speed of warfare is simply exceeding the biological and cognitive limits of human beings. In a realistic scenario where massive swarms of autonomous naval and aerial drones are simultaneously attacking an aircraft carrier strike group, human radar operators cannot possibly process the incoming data, identify the sheer volume of targets, and launch effective countermeasures fast enough. They have no choice but to rely on artificial intelligence algorithms to make those monumental life-or-death defensive decisions in mere fractions of a second, But introducing autonomous machines directly into the kill chain carries enormous, unprecedented risks. Complex algorithms do not understand geopolitical nuance. They do not possess intuition, and they do not understand the broader strategic context of an isolated encounter. If an artificial intelligence defense system slightly misinterprets a blurry sensor reading, or reacts overly aggressively to an adversary's automated reconnaissance probe, it could instantly trigger a massive, unintended escalation. Military theorists and strategists sometimes call this nightmare scenario a hyperwar, a conflict fought at pure machine speed where the initial devastating stages unfold so incredibly rapidly that human political leaders have absolutely no time to intervene, negotiate, or de-escalate the tension. We have all seen dramatic flash crashes in the global stock market where automated, high-frequency trading bots trigger catastrophic, cascading sell-offs in a matter of minutes. Now, try to imagine a military flash crash. But instead of simply losing vast sums of money, heavily armed nations are launching advanced, lethal weapons at each other simply because their respective defensive algorithms got locked into a sudden, unyielding mathematical spiral of escalation. The idea of a machine-speed hyperwar is genuinely chilling. Would you ever trust artificial intelligence to make independent, life-or-death military decisions? Sound off in the comments, because this is a debate we urgently need to have. Furthermore, any comprehensive assessment of modern conflict must address the ultimate enduring target in any sustained war, the human mind. Cognitive warfare is not just about spreading traditional old-school propaganda through leaflets or radio broadcasts. It is the deliberate weaponization of raw information to fracture an adversary's society entirely from the inside out. In our heavily hyperconnected, social media-driven world, foreign intelligence services can bypass the traditional military defenses entirely and deliver highly tailored, mathematically optimized psychological operations directly to the smartphones of millions of ordinary citizens. They can expertly map and amplify existing political, racial, or economic divisions. They can deploy highly realistic deepfakes and completely fabricated news stories designed to systematically erode public trust in democratic institutions, in the free press, and in the government itself. If an adversary can successfully convince a targeted population that their own elected leaders are fundamentally corrupt, that the ongoing war is entirely unjust, or that ultimate victory is mathematically impossible, they do not ever need to actually defeat that nation's army on the physical battlefield. The targeted society will simply consume itself through internal division, protests, and political paralysis. The nation will rapidly lose the vital political will required to sustain a grueling fight, especially a fight that is economically draining and physically devastating. This is the chaotic, multidimensional new reality of global conflict. The front line is no longer a defined geographical border. The front line is literally everywhere all at once. It is buried deep in the software code of our municipal power grids. It is floating in the silent orbit of our planet. It is embedded in the complex algorithms of our automated defense systems. And it is endlessly scrolling across the glowing screens we carry in our pockets. To stubbornly cling to an aging strategy like shock and awe in the face of these profound, foundational shifts is not just strategically outdated, it is fundamentally dangerous. It represents a catastrophic failure of institutional imagination. Winning a modern peer-to-peer war will no longer be determined solely by which nation can drop the highest tonnage of high-yield explosives on a capital city in the shortest possible amount of time. It will be determined by absolute societal resilience. It will be about which civilization can best withstand devastating cyber sabotage, which military apparatus can continue to fight effectively when its digital networks inevitably go dark, and which nation can maintain its core social cohesion when subjected to relentless, targeted psychological manipulation. The terrifying future of global security requires a complete, unbiased paradigm shift, an urgent willingness to completely discard the comforting, familiar certainties of the past century and bravely confront the chaotic, decentralized, and multi-domain nature of tomorrow's unavoidable conflicts. Because if we blindly enter the next era of warfare tightly holding on to the fragile blueprints of the last, we will not just be surprised by the devastating outcome. We will be fundamentally, tragically unequipped to survive it. What do you believe is the absolute greatest threat to global security today? Is it autonomous drones, cyber attacks, artificial intelligence, or something else entirely? Let us get a discussion going in the comments section. And if you found this analysis thought-provoking, please share your thoughts and join the conversation.